You know that saying, pride comes before a fall. It's one we hear all the time, right?
Yeah, definitely. But do we really stop and think about what it means?
Exactly. So today we're going to do just that. We're doing a deep dive into this idea called the pride of life.
Because humility isn't just not being proud, is it? It feels more like an active thing.
That's a great way to put it, an active choice. And maybe the best way to see why that choice matters is to look at what happens when you don't choose it.
Okay, like an example.
Yeah, a really powerful one, King Nebuchadnezzar. You find his story in the book of Daniel, chapter 4.
Ah, the dream guy.
Right, that's the one. He has this incredible dream about a huge tree, massive. Everyone's benefiting from its shade, food, the works.
Sounds pretty good so far.
It does, until suddenly in the dream, it gets cut down. Just like that. All that's left is the stump.
Ouch. So what did it mean?
Well, Daniel interprets it. He tells the king, basically, Your Majesty, that tree, that's you.
Right. And the kingdom, Babylon, was like the tree's reach.
Exactly. And you have to remember, Babylon was the superpower. Huge, magnificent. Nebuchadnezzar had built this incredible empire.
Yeah, you can kind of see how someone might get a big head about that. All that power, all that success.
Totally. And that's exactly what happens. About a year after the dream, the story says he's walking on the palace roof, looking out over Babylon.
Taking it all in.
Yeah. And he says something like, wow, look at this. Isn't this great Babylon that I've built by my power, for my glory?
Uh-oh. Emphasis on the I and my.
Big time. He takes all the credit. And the reaction, instant.
What happened? A voice from heaven right then and there says, your kingdom is gone. And bam.
Just like that.
Just like that, he loses his mind. Driven away from people, lives like a wild animal, eats grass.
Seriously. Eating grass.
Yep. Hair grows long and matted, nails like claws. For 7 years. It's a complete humbling forced upon him.
Wow. That is intense. That really drives home that proverb, doesn't it? Pride in the fall.
It really does. Makes you think about those moments we all have, maybe smaller scale, where we're tempted to puff ourselves up and forget, other factors, or maybe just simple gratitude.
For sure. It's a reminder that whatever we achieve, it's maybe not all down to us. It can be given and it can be taken away.
So shifting gears a bit, the sermon we mentioned also included some more down-to-earth example, personal stories.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, the speaker shared 3 stories from when he was young, before 17, where basically showing off led directly to getting hurt.
Uh-huh. Okay. Sounds familiar for teenage years.
Right. First one, trying to impress some girls on his bike, falls off, gets a cut right under his eye.
Ouch. Lesson 1.
Then he's in a cave, trying to look cool, showing off spearfishing skills, slices his hand open.
Okay, that's 2. Hand this time.
And the third, he's planning to do some fancy high diving off a creek bank, again, to show off, and steps right on a broken baby food jar hidden in the mud. Cuts his foot badly.
Eye, hand, foot. Interesting pattern. Did you think anything of that?
Yeah, later on, looking back, he did wonder. He kind of reflected on whether there was a deeper meaning, like a spiritual lesson tied to the eye, the hand, and the foot. Maybe even our clumsy moments have something to teach us about our insides.
That's actually quite profound.
Yeah.
It makes you think about those little everyday urges to look good or get noticed and how maybe they have ripples we don't expect.
Exactly. And it's not always dramatic like Nebuchadnezzar. Sometimes it's more subtle. Like another story he told was about renting a fancy car.
Okay.
He felt really conflicted about driving it to church. Like, what would people think? Was it showing off?
Yeah, I can see that internal debate.
And then the punchline is he accidentally sets off the panic alarm right there in the church parking lot.
Oh, no. That's kind of funny, but also telling, maybe.
Totally. It highlighted that feeling, right? Even if your intentions are okay, pride or the fear of looking prideful can make things awkward.
And it brings up that whole aspect of how our actions affect others or how they might be perceived.
Right. He realized he didn't want to be a stumbling block or make people think he was something he wasn't, which leads into this really stark quote that was shared.
What was it?
Something like, "You're never more like the devil than when you're proud, and you're never more like Christ than when you're humble."
Wow. That really puts it in perspective.
Yeah.
A fundamental choice almost.
Yeah. It paints pride and humility as complete opposites. One lifts you up, maybe separates you. The other connects you, makes you aware you need others, or God.
That connection part is key, I think.
And there was another story illustrating this tension. He's at this big church conference, checks into the hotel, and somehow gets this massive, unexpected upgrade to the papal room, apparently.
What, the papal room series?
Yeah, because someone recognized him. And he admits right there, feeling this little bubble of pride start to rise up, like, oh, look at me.
That temptation.
But then almost immediately, just before he had to go speak to thousands of people, someone else, Dwight Nelson apparently, comes up and gives him this timely warning about, guess what?
Pride.
Exactly. Pride. Talk about timing.
That's incredible. It shows how even in moments that feel like blessings, that little worm of pride can try to sneak in. You have to stay aware.
Constantly aware. It boils down to that choice again, doesn't it? Humble yourself or wait for life or maybe God to humble you like Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah, one path seems a lot less painful.
Definitely. So the discussion then kind of breaks down different types of pride, ways it shows up.
Okay, like what?
First off, pride in wisdom. Thinking your intelligence or insight is all you're doing.
Forgetting it might be a gift or built on others' work.
Precisely. Taking all the credit, which again echoes Nebuchadnezzar, right? His my power, my majesty thing.
Yeah, it does. And I guess that kind of pride can make you closed off.
Exactly. That's the next point. Pride preventing counsel. There's a proverb mentioned, Proverbs 12.15. Something like, the way of a fool seems right to them, but a wise person listens to advice.
Right. If you think you know it all, you won't listen to anyone else, even if they could save you from a mistake.
Yeah, it makes you kind of blind. And then there's the link between pride and shame. Proverbs 11.2. When pride comes, then comes shame, but with the humble is wisdom.
So humility and wisdom go together, but pride leads to embarrassment or disgrace eventually.
Seems that way. It also touched on how God tends to use humble people. Proverbs 15.33. Before honor is humility. You have to be humble before you can be truly honored or useful, maybe.
That makes sense. If you're already full of yourself, there's no room for anything else.
Good point. And related to that is seeking praise. Proverbs 27.2. Let someone else praise you and not your own mouth.
Ooh, that's a tough one in today's world, isn't it? Self-promotion is everywhere.
It really is. But the point was about not seeking it from yourself, not constantly blowing your own horn, and being wary of flattery, too.
Right. Then there are the more obvious kinds of pride.
Yeah, the sermon mentioned things Spurgeon talked about. Pride of race, pride of place, where you're from, pride of face, looks, pride of position, possessions.
The list goes on. Things people often do feel pride about.
Exactly. But the point was, these are often things we didn't even earn, or they're superficial. Yet it's a universal struggle.
True. And interestingly, it also mentioned insecurity as a form of pride. How does that work?
It sounds odd, right? But think about it. If you're constantly excessively worried about what everyone thinks of you, it implies you think you're the center of everyone's attention. It's still incredibly self-focused, just in a negative way, instead of focusing on, say, what God thinks, or just doing the right thing regardless.
I never thought of it that way. That excessive worry about judgment is still all about me. That's insightful.
Yeah. Then there was pride of appearance. Biblical examples were brought up, like King Herod in Acts.
What happened with him?
He dressed up in royal robes, gave a speech, and the people started shouting, "This is the voice of a god, not a man."
And he liked that.
He apparently soaked it up, didn't give glory to God, and the consequence was pretty immediate and unpleasant. Worms, apparently.
Yikes. Okay, so the message is, don't let your clothes or how you look become the main thing or a source of arrogance. Aim for simplicity.
Pretty much. Let your character speak louder than your outfit, you know? Don't distract from what really matters.
Right. What else? You mentioned possessions earlier.
Yeah, pride of possessions. This was a big one, using the story of King Hezekiah.
Okay, what did he do?
Well, God had done amazing things for him, healed him from a deadly illness, even made the sun go backward as a sign. Incredible stuff.
Wow, so he should have been grateful, right?
Yeah. You'd think. But then some ambassadors come from Babylon wanting to know about this miracle-working God, basically.
Okay, great opportunity to share his faith.
Huge opportunity.
Yeah.
But what does Hezekiah do? He takes them on a tour of his treasury, shows them all his gold, silver, spices, weapons, all his stuff.
Oh dear. He showed off his wealth instead of talking about God.
Exactly. And the prophet Isaiah comes to him later and asks this really pointed question, what have they seen in your house?
Oof, that hits hard. What do people see when they look at our lives, our homes, our stuff, or something more?
Right. It's such a convicting question. And the outcome for Hezekiah wasn't great either. Isaiah prophesied that Babylon would eventually come back and take all those treasures he was so proud of. And some of his descendants, too.
So the very things he showed off were taken away. There's a pattern here.
Definitely. The principle drawn was people are going to want your treasure. Which raises the question, what is your treasure? Is it stuff that can be taken or something eternal, like faith?
Makes you think about where we place our value.
Yeah. And the speaker shared another personal story here about a time a propane delivery guy came to his cabin. The speaker knew him from church, Sabbath school. But instead of talking about faith, he found himself mostly pointing out all the cool features of his cabin, showing it off. He felt convicted about it later.
It's relatable, though, isn't it? That temptation to impress with what we have.
Totally. And it touched briefly on just accumulating stuff we don't need, how that can feed into pride, too.
Okay, so wisdom, possessions. What other kinds of pride?
Pride of position. Using King Uzziah as the example.
Uzziah. Wasn't he generally a good king?
He was, for a long time, successful, strong, but then he got proud. He decided he wanted to go into the temple and burn incense on the altar.
But wasn't that only for the priests to do?
Exactly. It was a sacred duty reserved for them. The priest tried to stop him, told him it wasn't his place.
How did you react?
He got furious. His pride was wounded. How dare they correct him, the king?
Yeah, what happened?
Instantly, while he was raging at the priests, leprosy broke out on his forehead. Seriously, right then.
Right then. A visible mark of his transgression, his pride. He had to live the rest of his life as a leper, isolated.
Wow. Another dramatic consequence for overstepping boundaries out of pride.
Yeah. But then, for contrast, we get the story of Solomon, early in his reign.
Ah, Solomon. Known for wisdom.
Right. But how did he get it? God appears to him in a dream, basically says, ask for whatever you want. Blank check.
Anything. What did he ask for? Long life.
Oh.
Riches. Victory over enemies.
Nope. He starts by acknowledging God's faithfulness to his father David, and then he says something incredibly humble. He says, I am only a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in. Basically, I'm young, inexperienced. I don't know how to lead these people.
That's humble for a new king.
Totally. And then he asks God for an understanding heart, for wisdom, to govern the people justly, to discern between good and evil. He didn't ask for himself.
He asked for wisdom to serve. Exactly. And God was so pleased with this selfless, humble request that he said, because you asked for this and not for long life or riches or your enemies' lives, I'll give you wisdom unlike anyone before or after you.
Amazing.
And D, God adds, I'll also give you what you didn't ask for, riches and honor, because God could trust him with it now that his heart was in the right place.
That's a powerful contrast with Uzziah, who wanted a position or honor he wasn't entitled to. Solomon humbled himself and was exalted.
Right. It leads into this idea of the kingdom of self versus the kingdom of God. Is our life centered on me, driven by pride, or centered on God?
And that difference shows up everywhere.
Apparently, yeah.
Yeah.
The sermon even noted a shift in some modern worship music, sometimes focusing more on my feelings or my experience compared to older hymns that were more focused directly on God's attributes.
Interesting observation, a self-focus creeping in.
Which ties into religious pride. Jesus' parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector is the classic example, right?
Luke 18.
Yeah.
The Pharisee standing there, thanking God he's not like other people, listing all his good deeds.
I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all I possess. Very proud of his righteousness.
While the tax collector stands way off, won't even look up, just beats his chest and says, God have mercy on me, a sinner.
Yeah. And Jesus' conclusion, the humble tax collector went home justified, forgiven, right with God. Not the proud Pharisee. God works with the humble.
It's a clear message.
And then there's the Laodicean church from Revelation, chapter 3. Their problem.
They thought they had it all figured out, right? I am rich, wealthy, have need of nothing.
Exactly, but God says they're actually wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. Their self-sufficiency, their pride, blinded them to their true spiritual state.
So humility is needed even just to see our need for God.
Seems so. Humility is the key to receiving what God wants to give. And religious pride, doing things to be seen, seeking titles and honor, Jesus condemned that stuff strongly. It's seen as a major tool the devil uses.
Doing good deeds for an audience, basically.
Right. And this pride, this lack of humility, is presented as a huge barrier. There was a quote shared from a book called Testimonies saying something like, if God's people would humble themselves, there'd be 100 conversions where now there's only one.
100 times more effective just through humility. That's massive.
It is. It suggests humility is essential for any kind of spiritual revival or growth, for God's Spirit to really work. And another quote from Christ's object lessons called pride and self-sufficiency the most offensive, dangerous, and almost incurable sins, close to the unpardonable sin.
That's incredibly serious,
Yeah.
the most dangerous.
That's what it said. Because if you're proud, you don't think you need help, you don't see your need for God's grace, it cuts you off at the root.
Which brings us back to needing humility.
Exactly. And the ultimate example held up was Jesus Christ himself.
Philippians 2, right?
That's the passage. Though he was God, he didn't cling to that equality. He humbled himself, took the form of a servant, became human.
Became obedient even to death on a cross. The lowest point.
The absolute lowest. And because of that profound humility, the passage says, God highly exalted him.
Humility first, then exaltation. It's the divine pattern.
It seems to be the core message. Surrender the pride, choose humility, and trust God with the outcome.
A very different way of operating than the world usually encourages.
Absolutely. So as we wrap this up, it really leaves you thinking, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Where does pride, even subtle pride, show up in my own life?
Yeah, in our achievements.
Yeah.
What we own, how we interact with people, even maybe in our spiritual efforts.
Good questions. The challenge maybe is to think about one small step you could take, maybe today, to consciously choose humility, to lean less on yourself and more on, well, something bigger. God, perhaps.
Remembering that true strength, true greatness in that perspective often looks like service, like a humble heart, not self-promotion.
Well said. Definitely something to chew on. We encourage you to take some time, reflect on these stories, these ideas, and see how they might resonate in your own journey.